Welcome to MTG Tutor. Today we're going to be talking about the Outlaws of Thunder Junction precons. We were able to test them out a little bit recently, and we have some thoughts on how they played, what the mechanics are, and the commanders. So we're going to just start off. How did y'all think those decks performed?
Like garbage. I don't think those decks did play. I know now I didn't win a single match when we played those decks. That has no bearing on what I'm saying with these decks, okay? I think that they were boring. Truly, genuinely, I think that they were boring. I mean, I started off playing the Is It deck, and I had to look up the deck list mid-game to see because I thought I was losing my mind. There's only one counter spell in this deck. In this Is It Storm red-blue spell slinging deck, there's only one counter spell. So when you're playing this like quick draw spell slinging deck, it's not fun because you don't get a chance to respond to people ever. Like every spell in there is a sorcery, and if there is an instant, it's like a hey, scry 2, draw a card. And so, you know, and like that's good. That's not a bad thing to have as a mechanic, but if I'm going to play a spell slinging deck, I want to be able to have fun with it and like actually have some answers to some things that are happening on the board, which I didn't feel like I had. The biggest play that I had, I was able to storm off, and I created like 10 of the dragons, right? 10 4/4 flying dragons with prowess. Mm-hmm. But the very next turn, the board was wiped. And then the very next game, Joe was another person at our table. He was playing the Is It deck. He stormed off and he cast every single spell in his library. He literally had no library after using this stuff, the way it was sequenced and everything happened. And at the end of that turn, all he was able to do was swing with 4 drakes, 4 2/2 drakes. And like that just kind of feels bad. Like if he storms off that much to where he's casting all of his spells and going through his entire library, that I feel like in that type of a deck, there should be some sort of a win condition in there. Something in there that's like, you're gonna win now. And I know that some of that has to do with what pieces you have on the board, because there are a couple spells in there that are like when you cast an instant or sorcery, you deal 1 damage to any target. You know, or like Niv Mizzet as well. Things like that. But I genuinely just didn't have fun. Our first game lasted 4 hours, and that's a long time. I thought 2 hours in when I created all those dragons that it was going to be game over, and I was pretty happy. I was like, finally, unless someone responds to this, it's going to be game over. I'm going to end it next turn. And
then someone responded.
They did, which is, I wouldn't expect anything less. You know what I mean? It's Magic. But then I kind of attributed some of that to us getting used to the cards. And then the next game was another 3-hour game. And it's just like these decks are slow. It's a mud fest, I feel like. It's not fun. And I feel like Commander precons are supposed to be like a jumping off point for a lot of players to be able to get in. Like most experienced players, at least that I know, are now building their own custom decks. I would not recommend a single one of these decks to a person that is new to Commander. I would tell them to go back and buy Ixalan or even Murders at Carlisle Manor.
That's saying something.
Yeah. What about you?
I agree with Tyler. I felt probably 2 hours in the first game, I was ready to be done and play again. I got to play the Naya deck, and I played it twice. I think I was the only person that got to play the same deck twice.
Yeah.
The second time I used the alternate commander. I think just with these precons in general, at least with my experience with the Naya deck, as I felt like it was trying to do too much, that it just muddied what it was wanting to do. The very first game, I got to ramp super hard. It was super fun in the beginning for me, just because I think by turn 7, I had 14 lands out. And I was just able to cast spells or cast my commander we'd had like 6 board whites at that point or something like that. And I was able to cast them out every turn. I really liked the theme of that deck. I just felt like there was a lot of cards that could have been taken out. I'm interested to see if the Naya deck, how it would do not playing against the other cards in this other decks in this set. So I might try it out when we do another Magic Night, but I agree with Tyler that it felt like a slugfest, and it wasn't even a fun slugfest. It just felt really boring. Whenever the board would be wiped, it would take forever for us to rebuild our board states. Sure. And Tyler's right. Like the Izzet deck, it didn't have very many counter spells.
There's only one in the deck. I actually looked it up.
And I just kind of feel like Izzet decks are not meant to be played that way. So I felt like it was kind of missed. The theme of the decks are cool, but the execution just wasn't where it should have been.
Yeah, I agree. The Izzet deck, the weird thing that I noticed was that it did more drawing than anything else. Mm-hmm. And that's okay in an Izzet Storm deck if the deck has enough other pieces on board that you can get out or draw that would then do that damage. So like, who was it? It was Gutter Snipe was in the deck, but it wasn't even able to be played. I ended up stealing it with whatever deck I was playing at the time. So that kind of sucks for that. But there was only like 4 of those type of storming cards that like benefit from storming and casting the spells that create tokens or do damage or whatever it might be. And it was kind of disappointing. And there wasn't any of those damage slinging, which is typical, at least in my experience of building Izzet decks. I always have that damage aspect of the storming where you're storming damage out instead of only drawing cards or whatever it was that ended up happening most of the time. So that was really disappointing on that side. I feel that one is probably going to be the easiest to upgrade though, to be able to just swap out some of those spells for other spells, that it would be more competitive and be more useful and keep that theme if that was done. I got to play the other 2 decks, the Sultai and the Mardu deck. I enjoyed them at a very basic level, but I feel kind of agreeing with you, Jordan, like these decks were really watered down from what we've seen with precons in the past year. Like I haven't seen this week of precon for playability in a while. And I mean, there is going to be one out of the set, like the morph one from Murders of Markov.
Karlov Manor.
Yeah, that one seemed to be a little bit weak. I've seen it play well one time, but every other time it's been kind of just weak sauce, just because morphing can be a little bit hard to really kind of synergize with, or at least plan well. Beyond that, I mean, these were kind of weak. I do want to point out, though, that the alt commanders and the commanders all seem to be really viable for being a commander. But with that being said, these decks were only like semi built really for their main commanders, whereas all the alt commanders, it seemed like they were not built for the deck. Like when we did see you switch out that to the alt commander, your game was so bad.
Yeah, exactly. It was not a good deck with the alt commander, which is a bummer because I liked his abilities, but there's just not enough synergy for that alt commander to be the commander.
Exactly. And I was wondering the same thing with, say, the Mardu deck, the Outlaws, because that alt commander, I forget his name, but he does really cool things. Yeah, he's awesome with all the treasure, but the problem is he doesn't create the treasure. So you kind of need some other engines to create treasure, and the deck does have some of them, but the main engine is Olivia, and her, you just doing damage with a outlaw. As far as the Gonti deck, I felt that was the weakest because I didn't get to do anything that game for stealing. Like it felt like I barely cast like 3 spells or stole maybe like 3 spells. But really, I guess I took 2 lands and 3 spells or something. But that one was a little bit of a bummer, even though I was looking forward to it.
You know, that Gonti deck could be one, like Jordan said, though, where if you played it in a different environment, like in a different pod, it might do very well, because the thing is, the things that you stole really weren't bangers. And like you said, these decks were watered down. So in reality, there's probably only 1 or 2 bangers in each of these decks that you could have stolen. And so, you know, stealing something in that type of a scenario where you are, you're basically, your chance of actually getting a big hitter is really low, is not going to feel as worth it. And I agree with what you're saying about not having the synergy there, because when I played the Mardu deck, I actually felt the same way. Like one of the abilities, a lot of the abilities have to deal directly with, you know what I mean, outlaws, triggering things with outlaws. And it feels like there's not enough outlaw triggers in this set. Like the mechanic of like, oh, these are outlaws is cool, but why would you not have it where every one of these decks has, you know what I mean, maybe like 7 to 10 pieces in the deck that trigger off of its main mechanic?
Yeah.
You know, like if you were to go and build a deck by hand, you would build it that way, where you had redundancy and where you could achieve the triggers that you need to make it good. And there was just no redundancy in these decks. It was like, you have 3 pieces out of your 100 to make it work. And if you can't, you're going to lose.
Yep.
And I feel that might be somewhat inaccurate to a degree, because I feel they do have the 7 things that interact with their commander, but it is only 7 things. You have all those other cards in the deck that are not interacting. So the chance of getting those 7 things in these pre-con decks that have maybe like 2 to like 4 different sub-themes, it just does not work out. They didn't end up playing and performing very well. But I want to hear your guys' thoughts on, like, would you pick one of these commanders or alt commanders and then build around them?
I really like, I can only speak from playing the Naya deck. With how long it took for the games, I didn't get a chance to play any of the other decks, which is unfortunate. But I really liked Yuma a lot. I really liked how the deck was performing with him as the commander. And like I said, I really want to try this deck out against other decks to see how well it would function. So I liked Yuma a lot, and I liked a lot of the things in this deck. There would be some things I would take out and maybe kind of tweak a little bit, but there's a few good cards in here that really are synergistic with each other. You know, Scoot Swarm was in this deck. I think Scoot Swarm would have been incredible if it hadn't been exiled or destroyed right away. I got to play Avenger of Zendikar a couple times, and that was really cool because I made a bunch of tokens. And then I was able to use a couple cards to put some tokens on those plants, and I was able to do some damage. It just felt like once there just came a point in that Naya deck where the engine just shut off and it just coasted. You know, it was really good in the beginning of that first game. It was doing what it was supposed to be doing. I was outramping everybody, and then it just took a nosedive. So that was annoying for me. Just at that point, just trying to draw cards to figure something out. But I like the Naya deck. I would probably play it again, just not anytime soon.
Not in that pod.
Not in that pod.
I think one of the things that was very noticeable is that deck only had a few landfall deck or cards in there.
Yes.
And that would benefit greatly from that, as well as like recursion cards, because it had recursions for lands, but you didn't have recursions for your creatures. So when you lost some big or some decent creatures, you were just like, well, it's gone. And you had no option to be able to get it back. So
right.
That was an oversight for sure, I think, in construction on that.
Yeah, I think that is very true, because there's a lot of mechanics where I'm milling cards, because the idea is to put land cards in your graveyard. So there's quite a few mill cards that I'm milling my deck, but there's only 1 or 2 cards that have recursion in it. So then, like, how do I get those creatures that I'm milling back? you know. So that I think that, like what you said, I think that was a big weakness of the deck. There just wasn't a lot of synergy being able to pull creatures back. I was able to get lands back, no problem, but creatures, there's no way to bring them back.
Yeah, I agree. I think that you could upgrade the Desert Bloom deck pretty good. It seems like it's built. It feels to me, seeing it play, that it's built heavily around green, which like that's fine. I don't, you know, there's not an issue with that, but like, I don't know. It felt like you got to a point where you had a ton of mana, but then you didn't have any big things to spend it on, and like that was like, in this deck, there's only 2 creatures that are bigger than a 5/5. And there's a lot more than that exist in green that could synergize with this deck very well. And I'm not saying you have to have something that's like bigger than a 5/5 in order to win. I'm just saying that this deck ramps very, very heavily. And if you have a deck that ramps this hard, you need something to spend it on. And you've got to have something big there. And so, yeah, I agree. I really, really liked actually the Stella Lee wild card, the Izzet Commander. When I was first going into this, I was concerned about how much I would actually be able to trigger her abilities and how much they would actually synergize with each other. Where it is, whenever you cast your second spell, you exile the top card, and then you can tap to copy an instant or sorcery as long as you've cast 3 or more. It actually went pretty easily. Because this deck, I think this deck's mana base is not. I think this deck more than anything needs a fix to its mana base, because I was struggling with just only drawing out mana cards when I needed spells in my hand to throw. And there's 30 spells in here. It's not like they don't have the spells in here to be able to do that, but there are 38 lands, and I was drawing a lot of them with how much draw there was in there. And so I really like this commander. I would 100%, I would build an Izzet Storm deck around this commander. I think she's very good, and it surprised me how much her abilities synergize with each other within her own text. Because as you cast your second spell, you can exile the top card, and you can play that card until the end of your next turn. So if you have the mana for it right now, and it's something good, you can cast it right now and then instantly copy it. And so, yeah, I think she is a very good commander, because she is giving you an additional card off the top of your library to potentially cast. And it does say you may play that card. So if it's a land, you can play that card as your land drop for the next turn. It does help with not missing land drops for sure. I think she's good. I would use her in another Izzet deck.
Yeah, I would definitely add her to my wizard deck. I wouldn't use her as the commander probably, but I would still have her. Maybe an alt commander. But as far as like Mardu and the Sultai deck, I think the commanders are great. But for Gonti, my main hiccup, and that I was really struggling with, was using him to actually trigger his own ability. And I think an easy solution would be just throwing in some, artifact equipment or anything in there to be able to give him better evasion, whether it be giving him fly or anything. And that's not really the full solution for that deck for sure, but that was something that I knew I would want to put in a deck if I was going to start building around him, because he costs a lot. I would want to protect him so I don't have to recast him a ton. Whereas like Olivia, she was only 4 mana, so she wasn't as bad or painful to be able to recast her. And then that game that I played, that one, she got lightning greaves on, and she was pretty much protected for almost the whole game until that board wipe happened. And her ability is good. I would have to put in things to be able to trigger her ability multiple times to really enjoy using her as the commander fully. And I think that would be really easily done. And I mean, they could have thrown just anything in there. There's a lot of those types of artifacts or spells or whatnot in the game now. But they performed okay. I mean, they did end up winning, but I feel that the Gonti win wasn't really a win because Joe decided to just deck himself instead of actually trying to win. And Olivia just kept on getting life, even though everybody kept on attacking her. She, with her life link, made it so she won. Ultimately, I feel.
Yeah. I think Gonti could be a good commander. I think one of the big issues in this deck is that his ability relies on damage going through.
Mm-hmm.
And there are 36 creatures in this deck. Of those 36, only 3 of them have an unblockable trait or something like that. And in these colors, there are a lot of creatures that you could put in here that can have unblockable, or they can have, shadow or skulk or something like that to help you get those commander triggers. Not expensive cards either.
Yeah.
Cards that you could very, very easily swap out in your creature base with this deck and be able to trigger your commander significantly more. Another thing that's absolutely insane in a deck that relies on combat damage going through, there's not a Rogue's Passage in this deck.
Yeah, there was that weak sauce. What was it? Crawl space? Not crawl space.
No, it's
Access tunnel.
Yeah, access
isn't it?
tunnel. Power 3 or less can't be blocked.
Which was ridiculous. They didn't do that. They've been reprinting that in almost every other set of commander decks. It feels like too.
Yeah. Well, there's a Rogue's Passage in the Most Wanted deck.
I was gonna say there's one there, but there's not.
But yeah,
other one.
nope,
And
not one in the other
Both
one.
do need combat damage to actually hit the player, but
Yeah,
that was definitely something that
Yeah.
I was surprised with.
yeah. Overall, like I said, I think that these decks ultimately are kind of garbage. Like, sure, they're fun. Thunder Junction as a set, I would not pour a lot of time and effort into. I would go out there, I would pick up some singles that you want. If you want to get a collector booster to try and pull one of those cool textured foiled cards, sure. The commander decks, the precons, I do not think are worth your money. Absolutely, you could buy one of these and put the money into upgrading it. I'm sure that with $50, you could probably upgrade one of these decks to make them at least somewhat decent. I don't think with $50 you're going to push one of these decks to a power level 7. I really don't.
I think it's possible. If you're smart about it, it could. But at that point, why are you doing that? Like why not just buy the commander and then just make your own deck? Because more than likely you're stripping the deck completely. Almost, 80 cards out of the 100. The other suggestion, these decks are probably going to drop in price. Maybe the Izzet deck is going to hold some value, but I feel that all the other ones are going to drop in price.
Yeah.
Maybe the Mardu, I could see 1 or 2 things kind of keeping that somewhat at MSRP, in air quotes that, because that's not a real thing. But the typical like $40, $45 price. But the landfall one, I mean, it could, but they really missed out on throwing in like some good cards,
right?
That could have really made that one. And they're really cheap. A lot of landfall cards are pretty cheap.
Yeah.
At least they could have done a budget version of it, and you could just upgrade. But I feel that they all will within about 2 weeks to a month and a half. They're all going to be down in the 30s or close to 30s.
Yeah.
So.
Yep, I agree. So if you like Thunder Junction, go pick up some singles. Stay away from these freaking dog water commander decks.
Unless you want to, you can spend your money how you want.
It's true. Spend your money how you want, as long as it's not on Thunder Junction. It is definitely so far the second best set that we've seen this year. But overall, I give it a thumbs down. Garbage. Do not buy. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. And that's my consensus. So
yeah,
I know that. Yeah,
I would just say buy it if you're gonna strip it for things, or just buy the commander.
Yeah,
because the commanders are neat, and there's 1 or 2 cards that are really interesting in the set or in the pre-cons. But save
Yeah.
money, wait for it to drop in price if you're going to plan on buying these.
Yeah. Or just wait for Modern Horizons, because that stuff is going to be expensive.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
Oh yeah.
but, well,
You're gonna
that
be
has, yeah, that is a MTG tutor take about Outlaws of Thunder Junction. You know, I mean, it's better than not playing any Magic, but barely.
It's
Barely
pretty
better than not
underwhelming.
playing any Magic.
Pretty underwhelming for sure.
Anyways, yeah, if you guys liked our stuff, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe. It helps us out. We just got over 100 subs, and we're going to be doing a big time giveaway. Check out our content, because we're going to have a video soon where we cover the giveaway. And yeah, we love you guys. Let's go play some
Appreciate
Magic, but not Thunder Junction Magic.
It's not Thunder Junction.
Probably not. Never
Peace.
again.